Good morning. Welcome to NTD.
Good morning. Here are our top stories. A Baltimore bridge collapses after getting hit by a cargo ship this morning. Authorities are still searching for people in the river with rescue operations underway.
3 more suspects arrested in connection to last week's terror attack in Moscow that killed and injured over 100 civilians.
Former President Trump's bond cut by more than half. It's now $175 million with a little more time to pay. His attorney on this and his April trial date in the so-called hush money case.
President Trump's estimated net worth just doubled as the Truth Social owner closes the deal to go public. Bloomberg estimates Trump's net worth spiking in the billions on Monday alone.
The Department of Homeland Security raided properties belonging to rapper and producer Sean Combs, better known as Diddy. That's part of a federal sex trafficking investigation.
Chinese regime sabotage of U.S.-based Shen Yun Performing Arts appears to hit a new low with multiple bomb threats against theaters this month. We look at the latest escalation of an ongoing disruption campaign.
Raw emotion unleashed as fed-up property owners in a New York community share harrowing tales of squatters taking over their homes.
Where do youth go once they age out of foster care? A new project in West Virginia hopes to help these kids transition smoothly into adulthood.
This is NTD Good Morning. Live from our global headquarters, here are Evelyn Lee and Kevin Hogan.
Welcome to NTD.
Welcome. Today is Tuesday, March 26th. We just heard such shocking news out of Baltimore this morning. Really hope they can rescue those people. Yes,
and the fire department says the water is really cold and murky and there's a lot of wind making things difficult out there.
Right, so that's topping our news this morning. Baltimore is facing a mass casualty multi-agency incident. The Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed into the Patapsco River.
It happened early this morning after the bridge was struck by a large ship.
The collapse was captured on video. Footage shows the ship approaching the bridge and crashing directly into one of the support columns.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore has declared a state of emergency, and the Baltimore Fire Department says rescue crews are searching for about 20 people in the Patapsco River after multiple vehicles fell from the bridge.
2 people have been rescued, with one taken to the hospital in serious condition. Maryland Transportation Authority says all traffic is being rerouted.
The 1.5-mile-long bridge served as the outermost crossing of the Baltimore Harbor. It's an essential link of Interstate 695.
And apparently it says the entire Key Bridge is in the harbor now. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and rescue efforts are underway and divers are there too.
That's good.
Yeah, and we're going to move on to overseas here. Top Israeli officials are backing out of their planned trip to the White House. That's in response to the U.S. decision not to block a United Nations resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. NTD's Jack Bradley has the details.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has canceled plans for his senior advisors to visit the White House this week. Now, this comes after the U.S. has chosen not to veto a United Nations Security Council resolution that calls for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza and an immediate release to all hostages. The UN Security Council's vote calls for a ceasefire until the end of Ramadan, the Muslim month of fasting, which ends in 2 weeks. The U.S. didn't use its veto power and abstained from the vote, claiming the most recent resolution doesn't do enough to classify Hamas as a terrorist organization.
Certain key edits were ignored, including our request to add a condemnation of Hamas. It was important for the Council to speak out and make clear that our any ceasefire must come with the release of all hostages.
After learning of the U.S. decision not to veto the resolution, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu canceled a visit by an Israeli delegation to the White House. Netanyahu's office said in a statement, the U.S. retreated from its consistent position in the Security Council linking a ceasefire with the release of the hostages. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said that there's no change in U.S. policy.
The Prime Minister's office seems to be indicating through public statements that we somehow changed here. We haven't. And we get to decide what our policy is. It seems like the Prime Minister's office is choosing to create a perception of daylight here when they don't need to do that.
This comes as the U.S. has been facing growing global and domestic pressure on this issue. The U.S. had blocked the Security Council's previous resolutions that were unfavorable to Israel in its war with Hamas. Now, according to the United Nations, these Security Council resolutions are legally binding, meaning the order has to be carried out. Now, it's not clear how Israel will react to this order. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
For more analysis on this, we bring in Jim Hansen. He is the chief editor for the Middle East Forum. Good morning, Jim. It's nice to meet you. So first, let's talk about that UN resolution. What will it accomplish?
Nothing. And that's, I guess, the one thing it will accomplish is to go ahead and show the Israelis that America is willing to cave to pressure from the Hamas mobs that have been protesting in the United States and the rest of the people at the UN and other transnational organizations who don't want Israel to finish the job. So I think President Biden and his administration took a look at the demonstrations in the United States by some people who support the Palestinians, Gazans, and by default Hamas, and decided that they didn't want to lose those votes. So instead of vetoing this resolution, as they should have, they went ahead and let the UN put pressure on Israel that it did not deserve.
So basically you're saying on a practical level, it has little potential of accomplishing anything. So tell me more about the politics surrounding that. What was it about this vote that made the U.S. abstain this time around and let it pass?
Yeah, I think the difference is there is one last thing Israel needs to do to finish Hamas, and that is to go into Rafah. That is where the rest of the Hamas terrorists, that's where they brought the hostages. You know, that is the place where they've pushed all the bad guys to. And unfortunately, that's where Hamas has hidden behind, again, all of the civilians in that area. So because of the pressure from people who don't want Israel to finish that, and there is, let's be fair, there is tremendous civilian damage done because of the fact that Hamas hides among the civilians. But that's a war crime for Hamas. That is not the fault of the Israelis, and that is not a violation of the laws of land warfare if your enemy hides among the civilians. But the people who want that to stop and who want Israel to let Hamas get away with this have put pressure on the United States, and there's domestic political pressure, and the Biden administration broke to that.
So on that note, of course, there's two sides. There's Hamas for sure. So did the nations in the UN Council recognize that this is technically only binding for Israel and that none of this would actually apply to Hamas? Did they address this in any way, this imbalance with a solution maybe?
Yeah, no, they did not. And that's really the problem. Because previously, the only way to say that an international body should put pressure on Israel, which is the only person being put pressure on, is if Hamas does what they're supposed to and release the hostages they took during that hellish invasion on October 7th. Unless they do that, there is no reason for Israel to stop this. They want pressure on the remaining Hamas terrorists, and unfortunately that will be hard for the civilians. But if the people of Gaza are ever going to have peace, Hamas must be removed root and branch from that area and a new government put in. Unless that happens, there is no point in stopping hostilities.
Right, and just since we have a couple more seconds, quickly, how do you think you would interpret Netanyahu's reaction to that, to cancel the delegation to the U.S., and what kind of strain does that put on U.S.-Israeli relations?
It's a dangerous move for Israel because they need the United States' help to finish this. They need, some support in both munitions and funding because this is an expensive war. So it's a dangerous move politically because he's putting pressure back on the Biden administration after the Biden administration failed to support them. I think the Biden's team will end up seeing that the people who are our allies are the Israelis, and we need to back them fully and this will turn out probably to be just a temporary bump in the road.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim Hansen, for your analysis on this.
Good to be with you.
Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is currently in Washington to talk with top officials. He met with Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington yesterday. Gallant is set to meet Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in the Pentagon after talks with Blinken again today.
The State Department says discussions will focus on concerns over Israel's plans for Rafah. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said Blinken will not be presenting the U.S. alternative for a military operation in the southern Gaza city. And moving on to other news, former President Trump says he would have reacted the same way Israel did after the Hamas October 7th attack.
But Trump says Israel is losing international support and should finish up its war against the terror group in Gaza.
The former president made the comments in an interview with an Israeli newspaper published on Monday. A video of the interview was posted on the newspaper's website.
Trump says Hamas's killing spree was one of the saddest things he'd ever seen.
The October 7th attack sparked the war in Gaza that has raged for nearly half a year. Israel says its offensive will continue until Hamas is destroyed and its hostages in Gaza are released.
Trump was also asked how he would have reacted had his family been victims of Hamas's rampage. The former president says only a fool wouldn't react the way Israel did.
Over to Russia now. 3 more suspects were jailed on Monday in connection with the Moscow concert hall attack last week.
The attack killed and injured hundreds of people.
The 3 men come from Dushanbe, Tajikistan. 2 of them are Russian nationals.
Earlier, Russian authorities said they arrested 11 people in connection with the concert hall attack. 4 of them, thought to be the actual shooters, were charged and sent to jail on Sunday.
Russian President Vladimir Putin acknowledged on Monday that last week's terror attack was carried out by Islamic extremists, but he also accused Ukraine of being involved.
Kyiv has denied these accusations, and the U.S. National Security Council also said there was no Ukrainian involvement whatsoever. The Department of Homeland Security opened an investigation into Sean P. Diddy, the pop star, the hip-hop pop star, and his name is Sean Combs, and his stage name is Diddy. On Monday, agents searched the rapper's properties in Los Angeles and Miami. Here's more.
Los Angeles-based television stations showed aerial footage of Homeland Security investigations agents and other law enforcement authorities entering an LA mansion on Monday. The exact nature of the investigation has not yet been made public. Footage from the raid at Combs' LA home shows at least 3 people being apprehended by agents. The investigation is directed by Homeland Security agents in New York, where Combs was accused in federal court by an ex-girlfriend of engaging in sex trafficking. In November, Cassandra Ventura accused the rapper and hip-hop executive of serial physical abuse, sexual slavery, and rape. The lawsuit cited violations of sex trafficking and human trafficking statutes under federal, New York, and California laws. A lawyer for Combs denied the allegations. One day after the accusations were made, Combs and Ventura jointly announced they had settled the case out of court. The lawyer maintained that the settlement was in no way an admission of his client's wrongdoing. Ventura's lawsuit was one of at least 4 civil complaints in recent months, leveling sexual assault allegations against Combs. In December, a civil complaint accused Combs of taking part in a gang rape of a teenager that he allegedly arranged to fly from Detroit to New York 20 years ago. Combs, in a statement, denied the allegations as fabrications by people seeking money. Combs is the founder of Bad Boy Records and is one of the most influential producers in hip-hop. He has gone by various stage names, including Puff Daddy and P. Diddy. Bad Boy Records has been credited with the discovery of artists like Notorious B.I.G. and Usher. Combs' whereabouts are not confirmed at the moment. His private jet was earlier seen landing in the Caribbean, but a recent video apparently shows him at Miami Airport.
Coming up, former President Trump's bond cut by more than half with a little more time to pay. His attorney on this and his April trial date in the so-called hush money case.
And House Speaker Mike Johnson taps GOP Representative John Moolenaar as next chairman of the House panel on the CCP. The move comes ahead of Congressman Mike Gallagher's early retirement from Congress next month.
You go away on holiday and return home to an unpleasant surprise. Squatters have taken over your house. Homeowners say their hands are tied by laws that treat them like the criminals. Good to have you back. House Speaker Mike Johnson has named Congressman John Moolenaar as the next chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party.
Yesterday's announcement comes ahead of Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher's early retirement next month.
Johnson said yesterday that Moolenaar will be exceptional in the role. He attributed that to his leadership experience and academic background, along with respect from colleagues on both sides of the aisle.
Moolenaar says he looks forward to working with the Democratic ranking member to help the U.S. win the competition against the CCP.
The Select Committee has been a way for lawmakers to highlight economic and national security challenges posed by the CCP and recommend policies to respond.
The panel had considerable influence over the House TikTok bill, which would force the Chinese-owned company to divest or face a U.S. App Store ban. A partial win yesterday for former President Trump. The bond he has to pay in his New York civil fraud case was drastically reduced. A New York appeals court gave Trump 10 more days to post bond in the civil fraud case against him. It also cut the bond down to $175 million. Payment of the bond will hold off collection of the $454 million judgment against him while he appeals that judgment. For now, New York Attorney General Letitia James cannot seize the former president's property. Trump responded on Truth Social, saying this shows how ridiculous and outrageous the judge's original decision was. He asserted that he did nothing wrong.
Turning to Trump's hush money case now.
The former president appeared in court Monday where a frustrated New York judge slammed his team for what he called incredibly serious allegations. Our legal correspondent, Arlene Richards, has the details.
The witch hunt is a hoax. Thank you.
Former President Trump on Monday attended a special hearing in the New York hush money case scheduled by Judge Juan Merchan. Merchan said he scheduled the hearing to address Trump's serious claims that the prosecution was obstructing justice. Trump's attorney said in a motion to dismiss that the prosecution delayed producing thousands of pages of potential evidence by federal prosecutors, some of which they say could be favorable to Trump's defense. Trump is accused of making a hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential election to hide an alleged affair. The judge decided the delay in producing documents was not the prosecution's fault, saying, quote, "The Manhattan District Attorney's Office made diligent, good faith efforts to obtain the documents, and that Trump was not harmed by the delay." Merchan said the trial would go forward on April 15th. Trump attorney Todd Blanche responded after the ruling.
We're going to continue to do everything that we can to defend President Trump in that courtroom. We certainly feel as if the date that Judge Merchan held today, April 15th, is not a date we should go to trial, and we're going to continue to fight.
Trump said this whole case is a disgrace.
This is a case that could have been brought 3.5 years ago. And now they're fighting over days because they want to try and do it during the election. This is election interference. That's all it is. Election interference.
Judge Merchan said there would be no further delays of this trial, but he did accept a motion filed by the defense on Monday to address pre-trial publicity. He gave the prosecution 1 week to respond. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
For some legal analysis on former President Trump's bond in his civil fraud case and the upcoming trial in his hush money case, we hear from Will Scharf, a former federal prosecutor and attorney for former President Trump. Will, great to have you with us. Does the appellate court's ruling lowering the bond represent a first step towards the ultimate reversal of the judgment like Trump's attorney says it does?
Yeah, the New York Appellate Division's decision yesterday we view as an absolute repudiation of Attorney General James and Judge Enraging and really just their entire handling of this case. We saw the bond reduced from an absolutely impossible number to a high but much more manageable number. That means we're going to be able to pursue appeals in this case. We're not going to be railroaded through that process. We also saw significant aspects of Judge Enraging's decision be stayed pending final resolution on appeal. That includes a director and officers ban on President Trump's children, a ban on lending or on taking loans from New York-based financial institutions. All in all, we believe this decision yesterday represents the appellate division pumping the brakes in a very serious way on this headlong rush towards the confiscatory fine imposed by Judge Engoron, and we feel very good about our chances on appeal in this case.
I see, Will, and Trump said that he will post that bond and it could be cash and or a mixture of other means. The appeals court has allowed Trump and his children to keep running the family enterprise while they appeal, overturning Judge Engoron's decision. What does that suggest about Engoron's reasoning initially?
We think it suggests that the appellate division is highly skeptical of Judge Engoron's entire judgment. And remember, our grounds for appeal are very, very strong. The appellate division already overruled Judge Engoron on significant issues relating to the statute of limitations in this case. We believe that issue alone would knock out 75 or 80% of the damages at issue here, supposed damages at issue here. There are also massive constitutional and New York legal questions that need to be resolved given the way Judge Engoron ruled in this case. We believe that this was a lawless decision. We're hopeful that we will have it overturned in its entirety on appeal. And fortunately, the appellate division yesterday gave us the room we need to pursue this case aggressively on appeal.
Well, let's move on to the hush money case, which now has a trial date set for April 15th. This is set to be Trump's first and possibly only criminal trial before the November election. Will this impede Trump's ability to campaign, or can he manage to do both? And are there some legal strategies that can help him navigate this?
Well, we think this entire campaign of lawfare being brought against President Trump by Joe Biden and his political allies, it's all about election interference. Any day that President Trump has to spend in a courtroom is a day that he's not out on the election trail. And that should be outrageous to all Americans of all political stripes. That's not the way we do things in this country. I'd also just say that this is called a hush money case, but that's really not what this case is about. At its heart, this is a case about business records. And President Trump has been indicted for recording payments to his lawyer as legal expenses. That's at the heart of this case, whether that amounted to business records fraud under New York law. It's a tenuous legal theory. We believe this case should have never been brought. And the fact that President Trump is going to have to sit through a 6-week or 8-week trial on this, I believe is outrageous. But again, there are serious legal deficiencies with this case, probably most notably that it's reliant heavily on the testimony of Michael Cohen, a known perjurer who has been found by numerous courts to be a wildly not credible witness. So we believe that we have very, very strong defenses in this case, and hopefully that's what we see in court in just a couple weeks.
Well, thank you for your time this morning. Will Scharf, former federal prosecutor and attorney for President Trump.
Great to be with you guys.
Property rights have been in the spotlight lately due to highly publicized clashes between squatters and homeowners.
A New York City councilwoman held a conference yesterday on the subject. NTD's Daniel Monahan has the highlights from those in attendance.
Councilwoman Vicky Palladino addressed residents in Bayside, Queens, telling them the situation with squatting has gotten out of control.
You have every right to defend your property. You will do it as you need to do it.
Palladino brought up the recent case of a woman who inherited an apartment in Manhattan and returned to it from Spain.
To find 2 illegal immigrants in that apartment who beat her to a pulp, where her 19-year-old son found her stuffed in a duffel bag.
Palladino says society has reached a point where very serious decisions have to be made. According to the councilwoman, the majority of squatters prey on the weakness of New York laws.
That puts the tenants / squatters ahead of you, the property owners.
Palladino told supporters that property rights are one of the most fundamental rights that Americans have. People were gathered outside the house of a homeowner named Susan, who says her house was taken over by squatters who scammed her mom, who has since passed away.
I didn't want to sell my mother's house. I haven't even been able to go through her stuff. It's just not fair that I'm forced to sell the house. But to make matters even worse, I sold the house and they still won't leave.
This homeowner says his eviction case took 2 years and that the tenants only paid 1 month's rent the whole time. They eventually escaped when warrants for their arrest from another state became known. His lawyer told him not to change the locks, as that would be considered an illegal eviction by the courts.
A few days later, a new group of people moved into my property without my permission.
This constituent says homeowners are treated like criminals.
People buy a property thinking this is the American dream and that this is having the retirement fund. And then something like they go away on vacation, someone takes over their home, and the laws are not protecting us.
The concerned citizen is calling out lawmakers.
The laws have really done a lot of damage to our society. It makes us really question, like, what are elected officials working for?
Some in attendance called on people to contact their governmental representatives and demand action on fair laws for homeowners. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
I wanted to learn more about how something like this could happen and what the law says about this, so I spoke to New York attorney Bobby Ann Cox. Here's what she told me.
Yes, absolutely. So the situation here is that this homeowner had people come into her home and start living there, which is called squatting. Now, in New York State, we have a law which says that if somebody is squatting in a property for 30 consecutive days or longer, they automatically become a tenant, even if the homeowner did not want them to be a tenant, and even if there's no lease signed between the tenant and the landlord. So here in New York State, tenants' rights are very strong, and after that 30-day period, the homeowner now has to go and hire an attorney and try to have an eviction done on the squatters in order to get them out.
This is just such an unusual circumstance here. In the law, it says that a homeowner can't change the locks, they can't cut off the utilities, and they have to not remove any belongings that go to these so-called tenants here. How do you suspect that these squatters got there in the first place? Was it through legal means or was it illegal?
Well, I'm not really acquainted with the specifics of this case in this instance. However, typically speaking, you can have squatters, either they could be somebody who has no relationship to the home or to the landlord, and they just see that it's a vacant home and they go in and they start living there. Or it could be a situation where they were former tenants that did have a lease with the landlord, and then when the lease ended, they didn't want to leave, and so they just held over. And then in that instance, they would also be considered squatters because they're not legally there with the permission from the landlord. So there are different ways in which people can become squatters in a home.
This is a really wild circumstance, and the homeowner used the word enraging to describe what she's going through here. Is there an amendment that's being proposed to the law to change this?
Yes, in fact, there is, both in the New York State Assembly and in the New York State Senate, there is a proposal to change some of the language in this law. What that proposal would do is, first of all, it would change the 30-day time period and make it longer. It would be 45 days, which means that somebody who is squatting in somebody else's property would have to be there for a minimum of 45 consecutive days before they could be deemed a tenant. And then the other thing that that law is changing, or is trying to change, is that it would say that if you are squatting in somebody's property, it would become a criminal offense. Right now, it is not a crime in New York State to squat in somebody else's home. Only trespass is a criminal offense at this point in time. But the proposed changes to this law would make it a criminal offense. Now, they proposed this change last year, and the Democrat-led supermajority New York State legislature has not moved on that. So I'm not really sure that this is going to actually become a change in the law, but it is there, and it looks like they are trying to get it passed. I just don't know if it's going to have enough support.
Well, thank you for explaining all this to us. New York attorney Bobby Ann Cox.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, Chinese regime sabotage of U.S.-based Shen Yun Performing Arts appears to have hit a new low with multiple bomb threats this month. We look at the latest escalation of an ongoing interference campaign.
And the New York Times is working on a hit piece against Shen Yun. This comes after years of the outlet's underreporting of human rights abuses in China. An investigative journalist weighs in after the break. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, appears to be stepping up a sabotage campaign against Shen Yun Performing Arts.
The New York-based classical Chinese dance company is a top target of the Chinese regime. Shen Yun shares traditional Chinese culture with audiences worldwide that the CCP has been trying to systematically destroy since taking power. It also uses artistic expression to expose the persecution taking place in China against people of faith.
Since its formation, Shen Yun has encountered various forms of CCP interference, harassment, and vandalism over the years. But the communist regime appears to have added a new tactic to disrupt the performances.
The Performing Arts Group says it received 3 bomb threats in just over a week. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has more on the story.
The first bomb threat against Shen Yun Performing Arts this month targeted the company's headquarters in New York. An email account with a Chinese name said they'd placed a remote control bomb and threatened to detonate it. A Shen Yun representative told the Epoch Times that the FBI is investigating the incident. Then email sent to 2 theaters threatened to blow up bombs if the theaters didn't cancel upcoming Shen Yun performances. Last week, an account name with Chinese characters sent an email titled "The Theater Has Been Bombed" to a California venue where Shen Yun was preparing for weekend shows. The email said, "We randomly placed a lot of bombs in the theater. Theater staff evacuated and called the police. Bomb technicians with detection canines found nothing in their search." A police spokesperson told the Epoch Times precautions were taken on the weekend with no evidence of any type of explosive device. They stated the case and information was forwarded to the FBI for further investigation. A third bomb threat was sent to a theater in Vancouver, British Columbia over the weekend, but performances weren't interrupted. A Vancouver PD spokesperson confirmed that a theater bomb threat came in Saturday, with an investigation revealing it was false. The bomb threats turned out to be empty, but it's not the only disruptive efforts the Performing Arts Company has faced. 2 of Shen Yun's tour buses had tires slashed 2 weeks ago in Costa Mesa, California, the latest in a recurring series of incidents. The tires were vandalized the same way as previous times, halfway through the rubber to burst when driven on the freeway. Many of Shen Yun's artists experienced CCP persecution firsthand in China for practicing Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. It's a meditation practice based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. The spiritual practice has been banned and persecuted in China since 1999. A Shen Yun vice president said the threats are the Chinese regime's last-ditch effort to hide the truth, and that the threats are taken seriously with law enforcement authorities involved. Shen Yun performs in around 200 cities worldwide for over 1 million people each year. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
Also recently, members of one of the troops were harassed at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago by a customs official speaking Mandarin with a mainland accent. The incident has spurred several Congress members to call for an investigation.
Separate from these incidents, Shen Yun artists have been disturbed to learn that the New York Times has been working on a hit piece on the company, the Epoch Times recently reported.
It comes after years of the outlets downplaying or ignoring human rights abuses happening in China. Communications obtained by the Epoch Times suggest the hit piece has been in the works for about 6 months. The Epoch Times says the article, which is not published yet, will play into the CCP's transnational repression campaign against Shen Yun.
This is significant because Shen Yun exposes through its expressive dance the CCP's persecution of the peaceful spiritual movement Falun Gong, many of whom are killed by the Chinese regime for their organs to turn a profit. That information is not what the CCP wants people to know, as evidenced by pressuring theaters to drop performances and persecuting the family members who are in China of Shen Yun performers. And records obtained by the Epoch Times suggest 2 New York Times reporters have specifically sought out Shen Yun dancers who left the company with a grudge.
That's right. Ying Chen, a vice president of Shen Yun, says they are seemingly ignoring a large number of performers who see their time at the company positively and as deeply rewarding.
Nathan Su, an investigative reporter at the Epoch Times, will tell us more later about how they determined that this hit piece was in the works. And for now, we're going to the break. Former President Trump's estimated net worth just doubled as the Truth Social owner closes a deal to go public. Bloomberg estimated Trump's net worth spiking in the billions on Monday alone. That's after. Welcome back. We're returning with our coverage on Shen Yun being the target of a hit piece by the New York Times, which is in the works. Records obtained by the Epoch Times suggest that 2 New York Times reporters have specifically sought out Shen Yun dancers who left the company with a grudge.
And Ying Chen, a vice president of Shen Yun, says they are seemingly ignoring a large number of performers who see their time at the company positively and as deeply rewarding.
Nathan Su, a senior investigative reporter at the Epoch Times, tells me more about how they determined this hit piece was in the works.
Oh, thank you for having me, Kevin. Yeah, the stories was brought to us by Shen Yun because they basically realized in the last 6 months there's a very small group of people, either the artists who worked for Shen Yun before or the people who worked for Shen Yun before as staff but later left Shen Yun. Now they have been approached by the reporters from the New York Times. And the reason they find that, this may be a hit piece is because all these people, they have they really have a common something in common, that they may have something little bit bad about Shen Yun they can talk about. Like some of the, for example, maybe some of the artists they are even working for Shen Yun now, but in the past they have some injuries. Dancers, they have a fair amount of a chance to to be injured during the training or performance. That's how these New York Times make an approach. So that's the first reason. And the second reason, New York Times in the past 25 years, majority of their report related to Falun Gong all contain either disinformation or misinterpretation, or in some of the reports, the New York Times actually directly make a crow of the propaganda made by Chinese state-owned media. So yes. That's, yeah, that's it comes kind of like together, so make Shen Yun believe New York Times has been preparing a hit piece against Shen Yun.
Yes, and if you remember back to July 20th, 2020, the actual anniversary of the persecution of Falun Gong in China, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation ran that hit piece on the Dragon Springs, which is the Shen Yun campus in upstate New York, when they found just a single disgruntled person who had visited there, and they zoomed in on just that. And then the CCP's Gestapo, their 610 office, they used that as leverage to justify their persecution of Falun Gong. So what are the harms that such a hit piece like the one that New York Times is working on can bring?
Well, they will project a very negative image against the Shen Yun as well as Falun Gong, because most people know that Shen Yun, a lot of people, like artists or staff members working for Shen Yun are Falun Gong practitioners, and Shen Yun Performing Arts was started by a group of Falun Gong practitioners, like artists that they flee China, came to United States because of the persecution. So they came here. The story is kind of like similar, like early times when Russian ballet dancers came to United States. So they started this tremendous, successful performing groups later, by their joint effort. So this is the a story that's, the audience that went to Shen Yun, after they watch the whole show, they walk away with the impression the traditional Chinese culture prior to communism, and also they can think about, which lead them to think about how China could be today if without communism. So the Chinese communist regime has been in the past always trying to make efforts to either ask to pressure the venue owners to cancel the show of Shen Yun, or using propaganda machines to do some hit piece against the Shen Yun.
Yes, Nathan Su, senior investigative reporter for the Epoch Times, thank you for shining a light on this.
Thank you for having me.
And Chen, the vice president, also notes a big red flag, which is that some of the interviewees the New York Times spoke to go back to China freely and repeatedly. That is very alarming, considering that everyone knows that if you're working for Shen Yun or if you're practicing Falun Gong, you'd be in grave danger if you return to China. And what's more, Chen says they have communications that show these interviewees were happy with their experience at Shen Yun, but are now saying the opposite to the New York Times.
And not only that, but the CCP views Shen Yun campus as a headquarters of activities of Falun Gong practitioners that aim to counter the persecution. And the Epoch Times obtained a document that lays out a CCP directive to systematically strategize to attack that headquarters.
That's right, but now we are switching gears because we have some business news to get to. So joining us now is NTD business host Don Ma to give us the latest updates on the financial world.
Don, bring us up to speed on social media.
All right, so yeah, 3 things I wanted to talk to you guys about today, and one of them is Truth Social owner. Trump Media Group is finalizing a deal to go public, actually, and as well as DeSantis signing a social media law that it is restricting use under 16. And one more thing is apparently U.S. Officials are accusing China of espionage. So let's start with Truth Social. So as I said, it has finalized its deal to go public. So Trump announced yesterday that it's going to make its stock market debut actually today. So now the former president, Donald Trump, for the first time joined the list of the world's 500 wealthiest people on the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. Bloomberg estimates Trump's net worth spiked by $4 billion on Monday alone. And that is giving him a fortune of $6.5 billion. Now, the closing of the merger between Trump Media and Digital World Acquisition Corp amounts to a multi-billion-dollar windfall for Trump, who, by the way, is the chairman and dominant shareholder of the new company. And Devin Nunes, the CEO of the combined company, said in a statement that the business will move to reclaim the internet from big tech censors. And he said, quote, that we will continue to fulfill our commitment to Americans to serve as a safe harbor for free expression and to stand up to the ever-growing army of speech suppressors.
Big mission they got there, and also Trump's net worth, as you I think mentioned, doubled with that deal. Also his bond now cut by half, so things are looking up for him. But let's switch gears, and you were mentioning the social media law that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis just signed. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So DeSantis yesterday signed a bill that bans children under the age of 14 from social media platforms and requires 14 and 15-year-olds to actually get parental consent if they want to use it. So the measure requires social media platforms to terminate the accounts of people from ages of 14 and under, and those people under 16 who do not have parental consent as well will be terminated. It requires them to use a third-party verification system to screen out those who are underage. And DeSantis said in a statement that social media harms children in a variety of ways, and he says the legislation gives parents a greater ability to protect their children. Now, the bill does not actually name any specific social media platforms, but states that its targets are social media sites that promote infinite scrolling, display reaction metrics like likes, autoplay features, and have live streaming and push notifications. It said it's going to exempt websites and apps whose main function is email, messaging, or texting between a particular sender and recipient.
Yeah, and that law goes into effect January 1st, and that's just next year. And then the proponents are hoping that it can survive those legal challenges. Next, let's talk about the accusation of the U.S. that China is engaging in cyber espionage.
Yeah, so nothing new here, but it seems like yesterday officials filed the charges and imposed sanctions as well, and accusing Beijing of a sweeping cyber espionage campaign that allegedly hit millions of Americans. So that's including people like lawmakers, academics, journalists, and U.S. officials said that the hackers' decade-plus spying spree compromised defense contractors as well. And in addition, dissidents and a variety of U.S. companies, including American Steel, energy, apparel firms even. So in an indictment unsealed on Monday against 7 of the alleged Chinese hackers, U.S. prosecutors said that the hacking resulted in the confirmed or potential compromise of work accounts, personal emails, online storage, and telephone call records belonging to millions of Americans. And the U.S. Treasury in a statement said the sanctions were on Wuhan Xiaoriji Science and Technology, as well as on 2 Chinese nationals. So very serious here.
That sounds very alarming. And I know there's some people out there that probably are like, well, what could they possibly get from me? But I think, you know, if you have the time, maybe look up the Chinese CCP's 1,000 grains of sand approach, I think, which is really alarming. So, but anyway, on that note, thank you so much, Don Ma, host of NTD Business. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And coming up, where do youth go once they age out of foster care? A new project in West Virginia hopes to help these kids on the path to adulthood. After the break. Welcome back. A new project is helping youth who are aging out of foster care transition into adulthood. New Vision Village in West Virginia will offer residents housing, employment, and life skills training.
The project aims to have its first batch of residents by the end of this summer. NTD's Jason Blair brings us more.
New Vision Village will be a community of 24 single-occupancy tiny homes, half with young men who are transitioning or aging out of foster care, and the other half with adults with lived experience, to be positive influences and neighbors to the youth.
Life in general is hard at that age when you are leaving a home and trying to start your way in the world, and young people that don't have the support of an extended family face dire consequences.
Siemens said many youth in foster care are at high risk when they age out at 18.
Currently, 40% of the young people are homeless on their 18th birthday. And for young men, about 60% end up in trouble with the law in the first 18 months after aging out.
Siemens said the young men will have on-the-job training and help build tiny homes for about 36 to 40 hours a week, as well as have 3 to 4 hours a week of personal life skills development.
Many of the young people haven't been trained how to have a bank account. They don't have a driver's license. It's very difficult to get a vehicle if you don't have family insurance to be on.
The village will sit on 7 acres next to an already operating community center that offers workshops and recreational activities that the youth will have access to. Siemens hopes it will provide a model for similar communities around the country.
There are some organizations in the country that provide housing for young people at that age and transition. And there's some organizations that provide jobs and job training, but there aren't too many places where the young people can both have a place to live and a work assignment.
Siemens said anyone who wants to learn more about New Vision Village or see how they can help to visit their website at nvre.org. Jason Blair, NTD News.
Great project.
Yes, giving them the best chance.
Yes, we'll head to a quick break now, but we'll be right back with more, so stay with us.
NTD News, the fastest growing independent news source in America, bringing you breaking news from around the world. Expert analysis, investigative reporting, and original award-winning documentaries. We're known for our uncensored China coverage you won't find anywhere else. We cover the stories that affect you and shape our world without the political noise. We report from the heart with you in mind. Watch us right here on NTD News.
Good morning. Welcome to NTD.
Good morning. Here are today's top stories. A Baltimore bridge collapses after getting struck by a cargo ship this morning. Authorities are still searching for people in the river as rescue operations are underway.
A New York appeals court gives former President Trump more time to pay a significantly lowered bond amount in his New York civil fraud case. The details on how this will impact Trump.
The Department of Homeland Security raids properties belonging to rapper and producer Sean Combs, better known as Diddy. That's part of a federal sex trafficking investigation.
Several Boeing executives are stepping down after years of issues with their planes, including a recent door plug blowout. What this means for the future of the company.
A judge threw out Elon Musk-owned X's lawsuit against a watchdog group that accused the company of platforming hate speech.
A German baker is keeping a centuries-old baking method alive while serving delicious Easter pastries. She uses hand-carved molds dating back hundreds of years.
This is NTD Good Morning. Live from our global headquarters, here are Evelyn Lee and Kevin Hogan.
Welcome to NTD.
Good morning. Today is Tuesday, March 26th. Today's top news in Baltimore. They're facing a mass casualty multi-agency incident. The Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed into the Patapsco River.
It happened early this morning after the bridge was struck by a large ship.
The collapse was captured on video. Footage shows the ship approaching the bridge and crashing directly into one of the support columns.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore has declared a state of emergency, and the Baltimore City Fire Department says rescue crews are searching for about 20 people in the Patapsco River after multiple vehicles fell from the bridge.
2 have been rescued, with 1 taken to the hospital in serious condition. Maryland Transportation Authority says all traffic is being rerouted.
The 1.5-mile-long bridge served as the outermost crossing of the Baltimore Harbor. It's an essential link of Interstate 695.
A representative from the Baltimore Fire Department gave an update on the situation on the ground.
Approximately 1:30 this morning, a vessel traveling through the Patapsco River outbound collided with a column, causing a collapse of the Key Bridge. Unfortunately, we understand that there was many as up to 20 individuals who may be in the Patapsco River right now, as well as multiple vehicles. So we have, as indicated, a mass casualty multi-agency incident underway. We have our dive team members. We have representatives from the Anne Arundel County Fire Department, Baltimore County Fire Department, Maryland Department of the Environment, the U.S. Coast Guard, the Maryland Transportation Authority, police. So this is a mass incident that we have underway right now.
Going over to Russia now, 3 more suspects were jailed on Monday in connection with a Moscow concert hall attack last week.
The attack killed and injured hundreds of people.
The 3 men come from Dushanbe, Tajikistan. 2 of them are Russian nationals.
Earlier, Russian authorities said they arrested 11 people in connection with the concert hall attack. 4 of them, thought to be the actual shooters, were charged and sent to jail on Sunday.
Russian President Vladimir Putin acknowledged on Monday that last week's terror attack was carried out by Islamic extremists, but he also accused Ukraine of being involved.
Kyiv has denied these accusations, and the U.S. National Security Council also said there was no Ukrainian involvement whatsoever. A partial win yesterday for former President Trump. The bond he has to pay in his New York civil fraud case was drastically reduced. A New York appeals court gave Trump 10 more days to post bond in the civil fraud case against him. It also cut the bond down to $175 million. For now, New York Attorney General Letitia James cannot seize the former president's property. Trump responded on Truth Social, saying this shows how ridiculous and outrageous the judge's original decision was. He asserted that he did nothing wrong. For some legal analysis on former President Trump's hush money case, we spoke with Will Scharf, a former federal prosecutor and attorney for former President Trump.
Well, we think this entire campaign of lawfare being brought against President Trump by Joe Biden and his political allies, it's all about election interference. Any day that President Trump has to spend in a courtroom is a day that he's not out on the election trail. And that should be outrageous to all Americans of all political stripes. That's not the way we do things in this country. I'd also just say that this is called a hush money case, but that's really not what this case is about. At its heart, this is a case about business records. And President Trump has been indicted for recording payments to his lawyer as legal expenses. That's at the heart of this case, whether that amounted to business records fraud under New York law. It's a tenuous legal theory. We believe this case should have never been brought. And the fact that President Trump is going to have to sit through a 6-week or 8-week trial on this I believe is outrageous. But again, there are serious legal deficiencies with this case, probably most notably that it's reliant heavily on the testimony of Michael Cohen, a known perjurer who has been found by numerous courts to be a wildly not credible witness. So we believe that we have very, very strong defenses in this case, and hopefully that's what we see in court in just a couple weeks.
And House Speaker Mike Johnson has named Congressman John Moolenaar as the next chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party.
Yesterday's announcement comes ahead of Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher's early retirement next month.
Johnson said yesterday that Moolenaar will be exceptional in the role. He attributed that to his leadership experience and academic background, along with respect from colleagues on both sides of the aisle.
Moolenaar says he looks forward to working with the Democratic ranking member to help the U.S. win the competition against the CCP.
The Select Committee has been a way for lawmakers to highlight economic and national security challenges posed by the CCP and recommend policies to respond.
The panel had considerable influence over the House TikTok bill, which would force the Chinese-owned company to divest or face a U.S. App Store ban.
An appeal concerning a controversial law that would allow non-citizens to vote was filed yesterday. The New York City Council appealed to the state's top court to support a law they passed in 2022. The law lets people who aren't citizens but have green cards or work permits vote in city elections. A spokesperson for the council said empowering New Yorkers to vote strengthens New York City by increasing civic engagement. A lower court ruled last month that the law violated the state's constitution. It would have allowed around 800,000 non-citizens to vote in city elections, like for the mayor or city council. A coalition of conservatives challenged the law, saying that voting is a sacred right for U.S. citizens. The Department of Justice is investigating threats made to election workers.
20 individuals have been charged so far, according to federal officials.
The U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona said they would continue to investigate and prosecute those who do harm to, quote, the first responders of democracy.
A DOJ official said election workers are being scapegoated, targeted, and attacked, and that 13 of the 20 charged have already been convicted.
2 of the convicted were sentenced for making threats against Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs.
Arizona was at the center of stolen election claims in 2020. Former President Trump lost the state by a narrow margin. The Department of Homeland Security opened an investigation into hip-hop star Sean Combs, known by his stage name Diddy. On Monday, agents searched the rapper's properties in Los Angeles and Miami. Here's more.
Los Angeles-based television stations showed aerial footage of Homeland Security investigations agents and other law enforcement authorities entering an LA mansion on Monday. The exact nature of the investigation has not yet been made public. Footage from the raid at Combs' LA home shows at least 3 people being apprehended by agents. The investigation is directed by Homeland Security agents in New York, where Combs was accused in federal court by an ex-girlfriend of engaging in sex trafficking. In November, Cassandra Ventura accused the rapper and hip-hop executive of serial physical abuse, sexual slavery, and rape. The lawsuit cited violations of sex trafficking and human trafficking statutes under federal, New York, and California laws. A lawyer for Combs denied the allegations. One day after the accusations were made, Combs and Ventura jointly announced they had settled the case out of court. The lawyer maintained that the settlement was in no way an admission of his client's wrongdoing. Ventura's lawsuit was one of at least 4 civil complaints in recent months, leveling sexual assault allegations against Combs. In December, a civil complaint accused Combs of taking part in a gang rape of a teenager that he allegedly arranged to fly from Detroit to New York 20 years ago. Combs, in a statement, denied the allegations as fabrications by people seeking money. Combs is the founder of Bad Boy Records and is one of the most influential producers in hip-hop. He has gone by various stage names, including Puff Daddy and P. Diddy. Bad Boy Records has been credited with the discovery of artists like Notorious B.I.G. and Usher. Combs' whereabouts are not confirmed at the moment. His private jet was earlier seen landing in the Caribbean, but a recent video apparently shows him at Miami Airport.
Coming up, several Boeing executives are stepping down after years of issues with their planes, including a recent door plug blowout. What's next for the company? Our guest weighs in.
A judge threw out Elon Musk-owned X's lawsuit against a watchdog group that accused the company of platforming hate speech.
A German baker is keeping a centuries-old baking method alive while serving delicious Easter pastries. We jump into the world of Springerle cookies. Good to have you back. A huge shakeup at Boeing. CEO Dave Calhoun said yesterday he plans to step down by the end of the year.
Boeing's chairman and the head of the commercial airplane unit are also leaving.
The company has faced accusations of prioritizing profits over safety. Boeing has been hit by more than 5 years of problems with its airplanes, including 2 fatal crashes of the 737 MAX in 2018 and 2019.
Most recently, a door plug blew out of the side of an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX in January, leaving a gaping hole in the side of the plane.
The problems have led to multiple groundings for safety issues and more than $31 billion in losses.
To address the leadership change at Boeing, we're joined by Jason Kunish, a U.S. commercial airline pilot. Jason, great to have you with us this morning. How much of an impact will the departure of 3 senior Boeing executives have on the company?
Good morning. Well, I think this is a good start. Unfortunately, though, time will tell on how much of an impact this is really going to have. My understanding is that only one of the 3 executives has an immediate departure from the company. The other 2 have until the end of the year to leave. It makes me ask also, how serious is Boeing now to change this culture of safety and reliability? If it were super critical right now, I think it'd be a little more timely departure. This also needs to be from a top-down internal shakeup, not just with the senior executives, but everyone, engineers, safety auditors, etc.
Yeah, something fundamental in order to restore people's confidence. Now, the stock at Boeing ticked up a little bit following this announcement here. Is there hope that with this leadership shakeup, Boeing will be able to improve its quality control, mitigate this ongoing scandal, and restore its image?
Well, when you talk about stock, I think about investing, and with investing, I think that Boeing needs to invest in Boeing right now. For over a decade now, we've seen Boeing have one issue after another. It started with the 787s coming online several years ago with batteries catching on fire, and now most recently the 737 MAX series with fatal aircraft crashes, decertifications, door plugs coming out, wire harnesses and wings being misinstalled. And this is really having a major impact, not just on safety, but also airline reliability with their schedules. They're unable to deliver these aircraft on time, which means that the airlines are not able to move the passengers that they have sold tickets for.
Yeah, and that fallout from that Alaska Airlines flight is still ongoing, with the FBI telling passengers recently that they may be victims of a crime and that they're still getting this investigation underway. Boeing is cooperating with the feds and is trying to do what they can to bring their safety standards up, but some passengers, they're still experiencing nervousness when boarding these airplanes. Are these concerns warranted?
Well, without a doubt, if you're traveling on an airplane in the United States of America, that is the safest way to travel anywhere in the world. That being said, over the last several weeks, there have been passengers that have come to me in airports, other crew members as well, asking about Boeing safety. And so it is top of mind in everybody in airports right now. Unfortunately, Boeing, who's been this icon and titan of industry in this country, is now the butt of many jokes. And I think it's warranted. Boeing has a black eye. Unfortunately, they've done it to themselves. And time will tell also with how much restoration they have in the public mind. So it's safe to travel, absolutely, but we'll see what happens here in the future.
Yeah, and on top of all this, Boeing is still facing those supply chain issues, but how crucial is it for Boeing to get its act together? Because, I mean, think about what would we do in the United States and the Western world without Boeing?
Oh, absolutely. Not only are they commercial, as you mentioned, but they're also military. We have a lot of military contracts in this country with Boeing aircraft. and they're facing issues over there as well. So this is a systemic issue with inside of Boeing, not just commercial, but military and other things that they're involved with. And so, I'm hopeful that this change is the first step in many to come. But I think right now it's a little too early to tell, but I am hopeful.
U.S. commercial airline pilot Jason Kunish, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And a judge on Monday threw out Elon Musk's lawsuit against a nonprofit group.
The Center for Countering Digital Hate blamed Musk for allowing a rise in hate speech on his social media platform X. Here's the story.
The federal judge said that X's case was plainly punitive and sought to dissuade others who might wish to engage in such criticism. The lawsuit accuses the Watchdog of violating the company's terms of service when it wrote about alleged hate speech following Musk's takeover of Twitter in October 2022. X accused the center of breaching its 2019 user contract by cherry-picking data to create false and misleading reports that Musk turned X into a haven for hate speech and misinformation. X blamed the center's reports for driving advertisers away from the site. In the suit, X claimed that it suffered tens of millions of dollars in damages from the publications. The judge agreed that X's desire to silence criticism was, quote, entirely reasonable from a business point of view. But the order says that the center used X's own search tool to collect public tweets, something the center could not have foreseen to be a violation of the terms of service when they signed up to the website in 2019. The chief executive of the Center for Countering Digital Hate welcomed the judge's decision. He said it affirms his group's right to hold accountable social media companies for decisions they make behind closed doors. A lawyer for the nonprofit said the decision shows that Musk cannot bend the rule of law to his will. In a statement, X said it plans to appeal the order.
And as Easter approaches, a woman in Munich keeps a traditional cookie baking method alive. It uses a special recipe and baking forms dating back hundreds of years.
The cookies are called Springerli, and they get their name from the dough, which springs up while baking. Let's take a look at this ancient art.
The dough is in the oven. After a few minutes, a miracle happens. The dough springs up. A Springerli cookie is born. Katharina Ratzinger practices the profession of gingerbread baker, one dating back to the 13th century. Katharina's collection of forms used to make the cookies date back generations in her family.
Und habe eine große Modelsammlung von meinen Vorfahren geerbt. 4 Generationen sammeln jetzt alte Holzmodel und mit denen stellen wir Springerle her.
The ingredients of the dough are simple enough, but the preparation before baking requires a lot of time.
Also Springerl ist ein Gebäck aus Eier, Mehl und Zucker, das man mit den Formen prägt. Also ich drücke den Teig in die Form rein, dann nehme ich den Teig wieder raus, dann wird er bearbeitet, kommt auf ein Blech und trocknet dort bei uns 2 Tage, was schon sehr aufwendig ist, mal so genau 2 Tage Ruhezeit. Und wenn er auf dem Blech liegt, dann ist das Gebäck nur 4 mm hoch. So rolle ich den Teig aus.
The wooden molds she uses are hand-carved. She has one dating back over 300 years.
Sieht man hier schon ziemlich wurmstichig, dieser wunderschöne Reiter und eine Spinnerin. Es waren früher sehr beliebte Motive, die Gutsherren schnitzen haben lassen. Da habe ich hier eins von 1697.
During Easter, she uses many different models for the cookies, including rabbits, fish, Easter eggs, hearts, suns, or flowers. But what's her most popular form?
Also wir haben ganz viel Hasenabbildungen, aber was das meiste sind die Osterlämmer und die wirklich in ganz vielen unterschiedlichen Darstellungen.
Katharina starts baking the Easter Springerli right after Christmas. She's now baking the last few batches before Easter arrives. According to ancient tradition, the sweet pastries will hang on Easter branches to be happily eaten by young and old.
I'm getting hungry now.
I know, right? They look so beautiful, though. I would not dare put my teeth into that, I think.
Well, there's one tip actually from MollyJWilk.com that when you make the dough for these Springerli cookies, don't rest it for 2 hours. Just rest it overnight.
Oh.
Yeah, it's easier to work with.
Oh, I see. But that's such a long procedure. Well, but then again, I think
things take time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And also, I don't think Easter would be the same, at least in Germany, without those Easter lambs. They really, it's part of the tradition. It has to be there. Anyway, all right, we have to wrap up our show now, but be sure to stay tuned for NTD's News Today broadcast at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's coming up. And for round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. I'm Evelyn Lee.
And I'm Kevin Hogan.